All right, so Michael Eckhardt. What to say about Michael Eckhardt? So Michael Eckhardt is with the Chasm Group. We were really lucky to have him join us as a keynote speaker, and he was actually very generous. We asked him, and completely unbidden, he was like, I can also give you a bunch of books. And we're like, that's okay, but that's like, oh, all right, we won't argue, we'll take it. So all of you, I think, have a copy in your bag of Crossing the Chasm 3.0, I think, isn't it? Right. Is there a sub-release coming, or is is this a major upgrade?
No Easter eggs, no.
No We'll be the judge of that. And so it certainly comes from a long heritage, but an age-appropriate, not in any way denigrating the time period involved in PwC, Harbridge Consulting. So Michael Eckhardt is with the Chasm Group. We were really lucky to have him join us as a keynote speaker, and he was actually very generous. We asked him, and completely unbidden, he was like, I can also give you a bunch of books. And we're like, that's okay, but that's like, oh, all right, we won't argue, we'll take it. So all of you, I think, have a copy in your bag of Crossing the Chasm 3.0, I think, isn't it? Right. Is there a sub-release coming, or is is this a major upgrade?
No Easter eggs, no.
We'll be the judge of that. And so it certainly comes from a long heritage, but an age-appropriate, not in any way denigrating the time period involved in PwC, Harbridge Consulting, HP, and Pepsico. He's an Harvard MBA. I cheaped out on mine. I was not good enough to go to Harvard, unfortunately. He has been advising, managing, mentoring some of the biggest companies that you know and love, and he can tell you more about that than I could possibly do. So please welcome Michael Eckhardt for the keynote. Oh, you've got that. Thanks.
Thanks, Brendan. Well, it's a pleasure, an honor for me to be here. I'm really pleased to be able to work at Product Camp here this morning. We've got a lot of people here, both in this room and there's a couple other rooms, I think, the audio feed and the video feed's going in as well. By the way, college campuses, there were a couple comments about, this is spring break, I think, for a lot of people on campus. It would be equally quiet on a college campus at 9 o'clock in the morning, even if it wasn't spring break, right? Adults might be here, but not the rest of the folks who we're talking about here. So looking forward to working with you for the next hour. But the day is really a full day. The Product Camp has put a nice set of modules together throughout the day. And my goal is, by the end of the day, by 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, you're able to walk back really equipped with even more of a sharper saw to go to market with and to go to product management success with. So with that, a couple things to start with. Who this is actually for, when we think of kind of the target audience for the work that we do at Chasm Institute, we'll jump right into some of the frameworks, some of the methods, some of the tools in just a few minutes. Is really product teams. Now, you may be an investor in product teams, i.e. you might be a VC, you might be a product team member, you might be an executive who manages them. That's all part of the same kind of ecosystem of what we're talking about. And by tech-based, it's a broad and also narrow definition at the same time. Of course it's IT, of course it's big data, of course it's AI and even blockchain, but it's also healthcare, it's automotive, autonomous vehicle, all those kind of things fall into what we think of as tech-based. Our definition of tech-based is, does the market shift every 2 to 3 to 4 years, that there's some discontinuity coming in, okay? So Procter & Gamble, great company, Pampers, an amazing product. There is some disruption, but not, oh my God, every 2 or 3 years there's a cycle of new Pampers competitors coming in. That would be more of a CPG model than what we look at here in the program. And the 3 questions that we're going to go through in sequence, there's so much for product teams to think about. I mean, your brain can explode on a Friday afternoon thinking about, what all you have for the next week. But there's 3 questions that if you don't isolate on those, then it's almost as though we're looking with one lens at our jobs in the product team, not 2 lenses. We need to have the multidimensional view, not just the one. So that's really what the goal is of what we're going to be doing here the next hour. I will be later on in the coffee area for any questions and such, and throughout the day as well, for much of the day. A couple things that I'm going to throw at you. One is none of what we do is going to be pure theory in this hour. We think it's maybe 15% frameworks and constructs, and about 85% real practical examples and applications. One of the things we're going to isolate on is if you're a product team member or an investor in product teams or a director executive, there's actually only 9 ways to screw it up when you go to market. There's only 9. You thought there were 100, right? There's actually only 9. And we're going to talk about some of those. And it may seem like hundreds, but if you get one of those 9 fundamentals wrong, then you've ruined your chances of being successful. And in fact, a key part of what we're going to be talking about here is when you leave today, please don't mention that keynote by that guy Eckhardt. He was somehow talking about marketing strategy. This is not about marketing strategy. This is about market strategy. That's different, right? Marketing is a function. It's an important function. But this is about outside the building. Who do you go after? How do you win? How do you dominate? How do you avoid just, have you heard this verb before? Oh, we participate in that market. You know what participate means? It means you're not winning, right? Oh, I participate in softball. It means I'm not really a starting player, but I hang out and drink beer with them afterwards. Participate's not the goal here. It's actually, can we dominate or be at least one of the top 2 to 3 players in a category, the way Samsung and Apple are in smartphones, for example, or the way Spotify and Apple are in music streaming and so forth. And so the idea here is this is really about constructs around market. There's amazing companies. Some of them are sponsoring what you hear here today on the Accenture side, and certainly Santa Clara University with its programs, for sure. And a 280 Group does great product management training. That's not what we do at Chasm Institute. If you're interested in knowing more, you can go to our website or our LinkedIn page. We're not going to talk more about that now. But the main idea is, today, in this session, it's actually not about the books that we've written. It's about the lessons we've learned and the 3 questions that resonate around, I hope, everybody in this room and in the other rooms as well. We've sold about 3 million books over the past 15 plus years. I always remind people that's not a lot of books. Harry Potter sold that many books like on Tuesday afternoon during book times. It's like, damn, how did they do that? We think the people that bought our books or have gotten them in talks like this, hopefully you've gotten your copy, allows you to kind of get an advantage, a step ahead on what those 9 factors are for points of failure that we go through. So enough about all that. What I should also mention, and I hope you resonate with this, is that on this next slide, we basically have an array of what we believe at Chasm Institute to be 9 key tech trends. Most of these are not going to be news to you, but the idea is there's about $1 trillion in money waiting, not investment dollars, I mean like real customer dollars out there waiting for engagement with you on the product team. And of those 9 areas, we can be really sloppy and talk about these as buzzwords or as really deep, serious solutions that you come to market with. But whether it's big data or whether it's new advanced cloud applications, not the traditional stuff we're talking about, or virtual and augmented reality, advanced apps, perhaps mobile, blockchain, analytics, the whole array. And let me just, in this room, let me just ask, do any of you see your life on this page when you see the categories? Quick show of hands if you see yourself on it. Wow, okay. Wow, I'm in the right place. Okay. About 3/4 of you raised your hand. Of those, what we're going to see is there's also a byline here that says there's other areas that we could talk about. Oh, this one's probably not that important, is it? Security and privacy. I was at a talk last week, and Facebook, an amazing company that actually the data executive couldn't go to the talk because guess what happened? A few days prior, he had to be at all hands meetings. This is a big deal, and some of you work in security and privacy. The whole idea about industrial internet, the IoT as opposed to the classic IoT. So there's a whole array, no shortage. But here's the risk: is as executives or investors or product teams. Right now it's March of 2018, and we all know this list. Let's fast forward a year, shall we, to March of 2019 and go, damn, there's a few companies who have gained traction, and we didn't. What happened? What I'd like you to have is what we call a no-regrets strategy for understanding the marketplace, so that you don't go, you're going to get a few things wrong, we all do, but the major ideas of who you target and who you go after, and avoid the sloppiness we see both in Silicon Valley and elsewhere on some of the work that we do. We've decided to hone in on SMB. Have you ever met a single, by the way, SMB is not a segment. Have you ever met a single customer who goes, hi, I'm an SMB? No, I might be an SOB, but not an SMB. SMB is an artificial construct for everything that's not enterprise that we think falls into. That's a sloppy way to look at things. we want to get much more granular, and I see some smiles in the room because you were just at a coffee talk last week where your CEO said, don't tell anybody the secret recipe, but we're going to focus on SMB. That's a horizontal, broad, one-size-fits-all. There are certain stages of the life cycle where you can do that, but not any of these 9. Just wanted to quickly introduce also one of our senior team members and partners at Chasm Institute, Andrew Salzman, who works on half of these, at least, maybe more, on a regular basis. Andrew, I just want to give a wave. I'm going to do an errand right now, okay? I was supposed to give you this yesterday in a meeting and didn't. There you go. All right, great. Check it off. I just did it. Okay, great. And so these themes, these 9, are ones that a year out we want to look back and say, what is it about your abilities to go to market that puts some precision and clarity on what you're doing? I don't think any of these are going away, but some of them are going to be moving faster than others. By the way, what you're going to see in a few minutes is things like AI. Artificial intelligence has been around it's been in what we call early market or in Chasm for 27 years. Okay? 27 years. There's been white papers and conferences and blogs and lots of talking. And finally, in the last 2 or 3 years, we're seeing some what we call chasm crossing. Some commercialization of the category in things like security online and dynamic security or voice recognition. I got a feeling your executives and gentlemen don't think about, oh, in 27 years, we're going to make this work. You've got a 2 to 3 year window to get things to market. So this has been a luxury for AI. A lot of talk, a lot of conferences, but not a lot of buying and selling and use. And it's now coming to the forefront. And at this point, it's basically AI, deep learning, a whole series of those things. So the examples that we're going to be talking about specifically are real company examples that allow us to look at, whether it's small to kind of mid-growth companies. Some of these are larger now, certainly. We work with about 2/3 of these, and the other third we study pretty carefully around. We're big believers in what we talk about as being best and worst practices, like what's the best practice, but also what doesn't work. And so the idea about what 280 Group does, for example, on the product management side, emphasizes some great best practices and tools. You should really, further check them out if you haven't already. We also work with large companies. These are the normal suspects. About 2/3 of the companies on this list are people we've worked with. About 1/3 is the people that we've studied. And whether you're in a small company today or a larger tech or growth company, you got a similar problem and a different problem. The large companies, you're probably over-resourced. People come to us, to Andrew, and say, man, we're going to go worldwide on the launch. Why? Because we got some funding from the executive in charge. The small company goes, we've been forced, Michael, to focus only on US and Canada to start with. We're really regretful. I go, thank God you were limited on funds. Because if you truly have what we call a disruptive innovation, you're a dead man walking with some global aspirations in the next 18 months. There's nothing wrong with a vision saying, by year 5, don't confuse your vision with your near-term market strategy. Those are 2 different things, and we tend to confuse those a lot. That says, we've decided this, and it's like the market may not have given you permission to even be that successful yet. And so the idea around big companies, small companies, etc., is really around that theme. Just real quick on one example of a company that's really only 7 years old. It's one that we've had the privilege of working with over the last several years. Some of you have heard of Spotify. You know about Spotify? In the US, they're at about 50-50 with Apple, so they're not viewed. Worldwide, they actually have more than 50% market share in music streaming. And we've been working with them for the last year and a half now. And they just reached an interesting juncture. They just hit their 50, and they're a 7-year, they've been in business basically 7 years. Their 50 millionth, not customer, that's not that important. Their 50 millionth paid customer. Wow. Each paying, if you do the arithmetic on this, $9.99 a month. There's others that are on student plans and family. I'm talking about $9.99 a month. Now you're all good at math, right? $9.99 round up by a penny times 50. That's $500 million a month in cash flow for a 7-year-old company. Based on only that target pricing point. They've got other price points that bring it up higher. Now, don't feel bad if that's not your 7-year-old company. But the truth is that even for them, they're fine-tuning strategy based on our methods and our tools and so forth. And by the way, it's Apple and Spotify as being kind of the primary around this. And you know what real pressure is? To not mess this up as you're growing at 74% like Spotify is. Because they've got another couple of years. They've got their IPO this month, actually, coming up here in April. They're in Stockholm. They're a nice example of a non-Silicon Valley company, certainly going to market. One of the things I love is when you're looking to go to the main marketplace for the first time, don't make things complicated. I don't just mean the product not complicated. I mean the message, the pricing. Spotify got this and understood it. Their price point of $9.99? It's the same price point in different countries. In the UK, it's £9.99. In Germany, it's €9.99. If you're an economist like I am originally, that would drive you batshit. Yeah. So those are different prices. Yeah. To the customer, it's $9.99. That's their brand. Kind of interesting, right? Versus, well, it's $8.47 here in Austria. It's like, oh, who cares? Okay, all right. So we work with small and large companies, but what we want to get to is truly the idea that there's three questions that really resonate, that we believe are kind of proof points for success in the marketplace. And on that one-page handout on the back where there's the 4 slides, the operative slides are upper left, which shows the 9 themes, and then lower left, which is the 3 key questions that we're going to be drilling down into in a much deeper way here in the next few minutes during the session. And of those 3, the first one, which is where are we on something called the tech market model? Where are we competing today? This is not about where you want to be, or that you want to ramp in August, and as a result, you're talking tornado when that's not. So we hope in the book, as you read it over the ensuing days or a week or whatever it might be, it's an easy read. We've written books that are harder to read too. This is an easy read on the Crossing the Chasm one. But the idea is, where are we on this map? And you may remember, if you read one of our earlier versions of the book, you may remember something along that the curve looked a little bit different, and it did. It was basically what we called the technology adoption life cycle, which was the initial curve of adoption. What we've done is built on top of that the real prize, that Apple and Spotify and Adobe and Uber and others, and where Tesla's not yet, which is really how do you get to the main marketplace, to the green part that truly matters on the mature, powerful engine of flywheel and customer referencing and all those things that happen. So the tech market model is clearly one of the operative pieces that we're going to drill down into today, and it's really about the mapping function, about where. The second question is a which question, which is, so what do we target? What problem really needs to be solved? And it may not be forever. It may be to start with, the next 12 or 18 months. I'm going to do something frightening for some of you here in the room, which is what we don't see enough of in Silicon Valley, is to once in a while cross stuff out. How good is that at your company? It's usually and. And the danger is, not because you're going to make me happy or Andrew happy or your executive team happy by narrowing your limits, but to say, maybe there's things we hit the pause button on for now in terms of target markets to go after. Maybe there's some that we will never have permission to go into, but there's still plenty of it out there. And by the way, a word I'm going to use, and I'll apologize in advance for using this F word. It's not that F word, it's focus. It's the word about if you don't focus initially on where you as product managers, product teams go, then your odds of later in fact, we have 225 examples of companies who have the discipline to focus initially and then build into broad horizontal dominant players later. We have 0 examples, and we've looked for companies who had worldwide aspirations to start with and actually became worldwide dominant players. And when you think that it is not true, that there are companies that went broad, it just means you weren't the product manager on those products in those companies, okay? So even the iPod initially, the first 2 years out the gate, was not anybody with a pulse, and $200 was a very specific demographic they were going after. And that then blossomed. You go, man, an iPod thing, that really went fast into tornado. No, if you're an Apple product manager, you know that it didn't ignite right away. It just seemed that way because you were involved in the heavy blood, sweat, and tears to make this all certainly happen. So the second question is a which question. And the third one is how do we move forward? And these are the 9 factors. And we'll get deeper into a few of these. But there's actually 9 factors, 9 ways to fail as you take things to market. These are actually 5 factors for success if you do them right. And there are actually 5 factors for failure 9 factors for failure if you get them wrong. And the fascinating part of this is right now there's meetings going on here on Saturday morning or on Monday afternoon with product teams, and most of it's about product. And it turns out of our 225 examples we've studied in detail, of the 9 factors for failure, things like, did we pick the right target segment to go after, the target type of customer? Did we decide what not to go after initially? Could be geography, could be application, could be the type of customer. Compelling reason to buy. This is really not about why buy your stuff. Compelling reason to buy is actually more like, does this make sense? Compelling reason to switch. Switch from the old category in the main marketplace to your new category that's disrupting it. A new SaaS model for a medical solution. Or it might be Uber versus taxi, which was one of the fastest ever disruptions. That happened in 36 months in a lot of cities. That's not normal. That happened very quickly. But notice something on this list. There's only one of those 9 that's actually about product, which we find fascinating. The third one is whole product. That if you're going to have points of failure, you may have the wrong channel strategy, the wrong pricing model, the wrong messaging when you go to market. Ironically, whole product, it's not even product, it's whole product. And it turns out that this is 1/9 of the failure rates, but it might be 8/9 of the effort for a company at launch. And we think that's a misjudgment on the Pareto there. And by the way, you're experts on product in the room, but let me be really clear that when we talk about product and whole product, we have very few concerns. I've been doing this work for over 15 years. We don't worry about our clients' core products. Man, those are some of them. And you're in the room here, some of the most amazing products and solutions around. We don't worry about what we worry about a lot and what we have sleepless nights over and we think our tools help is what we call whole product. And by whole product, it's the full envelope. And this is just a simple pie chart. It could be actually 15 to 20 items. We call them enablers. And that whole product is actually core product and key enablers. We used to call it key components, and then people are like, oh, hardware? Nope. A lot of this ain't hardware. It could be things like other application software, or legacy interfaces, or your pre-sales efforts, or all the things required to make the product sing. And a clarity piece is a lot of you are thinking correctly about MVP, minimum viable product. And it's okay to think about that, because there's nothing wrong. That's a good construct. But what we're going to throw at you here is a very unattractive acronym, which is minimum viable whole product, which says in an early market, if you're going after the early adopters, MVP is good enough. Does the product work at impact? That's a different question than if we think through the context of that first point around where are we on the adoption curve. Let me just get Microsoft to cooperate here for a second. One second, please. If we think of the construct to where we are on a go-forward basis on this, what it really says is minimum viable. This is okay for MVP over here, but it turns out that the normal customer over here doesn't want MVP. They want minimum viable whole. They want the insurance package. Does that make sense around it? That's where Nest is right now challenged with. They've nailed the early market, and the bundle came with a screwdriver and self-install and different plates, and it's awesome for the early market. This is Nest, bought by Google a couple years ago. And the problem is that package that's optimized for the early market, with a screwdriver, and I'll bet a lot of you in the room go, that is really cool. That is everything I'm dreaming about. You represent 10 to 12% of the market called early adopters. You know what normal people over here are thinking? They get a slightly sick feeling in their stomach about the screwdriver. And they're thinking, this isn't a product, is it? This is a project. And I'm not looking for more projects in my freaking life. Thank you anyway. I don't want a Saturday or half a Saturday. Those are two different audiences. Does that make sense? Yep. And we get a false positive when the first group, the 10 to 12% over here, give it a thumbs up, and that's okay. But now as you look to scale, you've got the wrong audience in mind. In fact, we met a company, and they will go unnamed, and they were proud that their HR department, one of the required questions for engineers and people they were hiring in is, have you already self-installed this product on your own? And if the answer was no, they didn't hire you. And our response back was, that is the perfectly wrong question to ask. Because you know who we care about is the 88% over here, and why didn't you buy and install it? Or you might have bought it and still in shrink wrap, right? And you haven't really used it yet. And that's the right question. If you're truly early, and we're going to get very definitive about early market and split it into 3. If you're truly 1A, then it's okay to say we only hire people who have already self-installed and used this product. But later, as you look to commercialize it, it's the wrong question later. Does that make sense? That the wrong efforts could be right in one place and wrong in it. So these are the three questions. And as you think through the process of whole product, I've got some bad news for you, actually. This idea about minimum viable whole product, have you been in meetings where people go, we've decided to define the whole product this way. Turns out, and we've learned this over the last 5 or 10 years, I guess it took us a while, that you don't get to define whole product. Your executives don't. Chasm Institute can't. We can think of some hypotheses around these, but who gets to vote on whether your whole product's complete or not? Customers, those people outside the building. And it turns out that for a lot of them, it turns out that some of your whole product and the enemy may actually be the complexity, and that it's more about subtraction. Does that make sense? Than actual addition. Now this flies in the face of early market who says, the more features, the better. I'll decide which ones to use. The normal marketplace says, don't make me, I've got a real life, a life outside of SaaS. I actually have friends on Saturday I want to spend time with, or play some tennis, or go to the gym, or do yoga. I don't want the day. Those are normal people. You might not have met them lately. That's the people who represent the majority. And so whole product can't be overemphasized in how we think this through. So first question is the where question, and we're going to dig down deeper into that one now. And by where on the tech market model, a couple things immediately come to mind. One is, as you're thinking about this, it's a little tricky because we're going to be asking you, and I'd like you to take this away, and the slides we'll be happy to share later, where's your company's key product or solution on the adoption curve? But wait a minute, nobody cares about where you think you are, or whether your product is 50% done in early market. And we'll define a couple of these terms in a moment. But if you're in a garage somewhere with 3 other people saying, we're doing music streaming and we're way better than Apple or Spotify or Pandora or whoever else is out there, we got a much better system in place, and you ask them, how far along are you? We're about 60% done to launch. We're not ready yet. We'll be ready by August. So we'll launch in September. And then I ask them, where do you think you are on the adoption curve? They go, well, that's not that hard. We're in early market because we're not ready yet. Is that the right answer? No, tornado is defined as massive growth at 45% growth rates in key verticals, key applications, key customer types, and that's where music streaming is today. It's growing at 75%, not 45%. And so Spotify and Apple would say that the category is here, and that it's not here. Is that a problem? If you're in the garage building that music streaming solution? It says the train's left the station. It left the station several years ago, and you're not on that train, and you're actually in tornado. We don't feel like we're in tornado. We haven't sold. Doesn't matter. You're in tornado, and you're not enjoying tornado. How's that sound? You're not ready. The challenge here is you've missed that. It's a little bit like showing up in Rio this year with your basketball going, we're ready for the contest. You go, no, the Olympics were last year. You missed it. Damn, you're ready this year. At least the Olympics, every 4 years, you get to redo. Yeah. Here, you're done. You can find new things to do. You might have an interesting feature that Spotify wants to buy, but that train's left the station. And then somebody in the room says, yeah, but we're going to disrupt them. Good luck to you. And in fact, we have a rule that says the market does not allow disruption when the new category, the fresh one, is in tornado and people are using it actively and it's not yet become mature. You don't disrupt the current category that's in the tornado. It just doesn't happen. Why? Because this is the category that people are buying. And there might be a few early adopters who are running Linux at home on their own PCs or doing other cool stuff. But for most normal people, it's Spotify or Apple. And so this is a cruel adoption curve. Is it possible that sometimes we're a little bit too early for the market, like AI for 27 years? And in other cases, we might be 2 or 4 years late and not know it. Is that a risk? That's scary because there's a few companies, they would not be in this room, I understand this, who are late to market and it's non-recoverable and you don't know it. Those are your friends, not you. I know that. Okay, maybe not. We'll see. And so the question as we go through this is where, so that for product teams, The question is really, this is based on our 500 client engagements, Silicon Valley and other tech centers that we've worked. 2 questions. One is, where is your product category today? How early or nascent is it? And what are you trying to disrupt? So, Tesla's been in the news. They had that unfortunate, crash last week, which was terrible. That was on self-driving. But we're talking about pure electric vehicles right now and performance-based vehicles. Could it be, and we'll define bowling alley in just a moment, just a heartbeat, is that Tesla in the Bay Area is actually getting commercial. You're on Highway 280 or 101, you probably see 50 Teslas a day, and you go, oh, look, there's another one, that's cool. It's like, in Boston, you might see 5. In Montreal, you might see 3 a day, and it doesn't mean they don't have money. It just means the infrastructure's not played out yet and so forth. Could it be, is it possible that it's the same solution, the same category, might be in different life cycle stages depending on geography? Yeah. Whenever a consultant asks, is it possible? It usually is, just to give you a good rendition of that. And the answer is yes. And it turns out that in the Bay Area, it's not even California. Go to Irvine, California, or go to San Diego, there's not as many per capita. And it turns out that here we're seeing it in chasm crossing mode, but not in many other parts of the world. In Amsterdam, there's 2,000 Teslas on the road, and that's a nice B2B vertical play. It's 2,000 taxis. That's pretty cool. That's how they're getting, and that's kind of a nice try before you buy. You get in a taxi, nobody gets hurt, you ride along, you pay, you order, you get it all, and I'll say, hey, that was a pretty cool car. It actually did perform better than the normal electric car. But those are exceptions to the rule. What we're going to see is what category you're disrupting today, and that's really about the old diesel, gasoline, internal combustion engine on Main Street. But for some of you, it's on-prem software versus SaaS-based. Does that make sense? Or consumption-based models and so forth. And so as we think this through, what we're going to do is get very specific just on one stage of the adoption curve, and then talk through how you can diagnose this for yourself. And what we're going to talk about is bowling alley. The rest of it, and again, what we advocate is, in the Chasm book, is to read. In fact, I think I have a reminder up on the slide deck. You didn't think you were getting homework, did you? Sorry about that. With every free gift comes homework. A quick reminder, what we'd like you to do is 65 pages. The first 65. Read those in the next, 6.5 days. That's 10 pages a day. I'm not asking too much here, am I? And Andrew and I wrote about 50 of the pages in the book. Jeffrey Moore wrote, our Chasm chairman wrote the rest of it. Whatever your favorite 50 pages are not the ones we wrote. Jeff is the better writer. But we've put examples in, VMware, 3D printing, etc. You'll see those. The 65 pages will give you great clarity about what each of these buzzwords mean, because there's not that many. But one of them, intrinsically, about what we believe is really the factor that drives a lot of adoption is what we call bowling alley. And I'll admit that bowling alley is not like the sexiest sport in the world. I get that. But bowling alley is about segments and about applications and about the ability to win in both the initial, what we call beachhead segment, and as well as the adjacent segments. And so these are basically applications. And we're talking mostly B2B here, but it certainly relates to segments on the B2C side. Some of you actually have a B2B2C model, right, for some of you here in the room as well. But these are specific types of target customers, and they're not early adopters. They are not the 10% to 12% over here who like the early 80% complete whole product. They're looking for something a little different. And by bowling alley, the physics of bowling, the physics of it, says if you can hit the head pin and build adjacencies, that's how companies actually develop, grow, and thrive. And we've got 225 examples. Again, we'll give you some real ones in just a minute. But the idea fundamentally is that when you're chasm crossing, we have a guarantee for you. If you're truly disruptive, broad sales motions will fail. I know you've got the, we're going to ramp in August or in September and December in Q4. And it may be delusional, it may not be. But the promises you make is how disruptive you actually are in the marketplace. If you're on LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn page, there's a few videos and blogs, so if you want to connect in, feel free to do that. But one of the videos, it's a 10-minute clip, it talks about the 3 elements of whether or not you're truly disruptive which means going back to crossing chasm, or is it truly just an incremental innovation? And I'll give you a quick highlight on that now, which is disruption is one of the overused terms in the Valley here. I'm ready to gag next time I hear it, so I won't use the word again. But here's the reality. Is, people go, oh, I had a disruptive breakfast this morning, or my father-in-law was once again disruptive over the holidays, or, a lot of uses of the word. For us, at Chasm Institute, there's three key definitions, three factors, and if two of those three are a yes, or a strong yes, and you can see this in the 10-minute clip on the video, then you've got a disruptive offer. The first one is there a change in skill required by the customer base to be able to use the product? Some shift in skill. It could be going from a manual process to a automatic or automated process. You might go, but that's good. We're saying disruption is actually good, but it's a shift in either skill or a change in behavior or mindset by the customer. It could be by the CIO. It could be by the end user. There's some shift required there. And the third one is a change in workflow or process. That we've got to do something different on the job. So skill change, behavior mindset change, or process and workflow change. How many of you think you have a product, and I'm sorry we don't have cameras in the other room, but in this room, how many do you think have a product that might probably be a yes, and that's not a bad thing, to one or two of those, changing skill, behavior, and process? Okay, yeah, about 2/3. Okay, great. Those are, and we've got more you can read about in our book in those 65 pages, but that's the level of, so when Apple comes out with a new iPad, and man, it's amazing. It's thinner, it's more beautiful, it's got some high optic quality on the screen, and the battery life has gone from 5 hours to 9 hours. Those are all non-disruptive innovations. Does that make sense? Yep. And by the way, analysts, Gartner, smart people at Gartner, but they go, oh my God, Apple's disappointed us. There's no breakthrough in this product. And I got a little secret for you. When you're in tornado like the iPad has been, and it's only a 2 or 4 year window, you only do incremental innovation, not just because you don't want to screw up or F up the market. And it turns out that if you had a 4D, high quality resolution, retina, blah, blah, that takes you back earlier. And so the idea is that battery life, most people go, oh my God, change in skill, behavior, process. I can now work for 9 hours, not 5, before I recharge. That's like, no, that's a nice idea. I'm going for that. But going from an on-prem solution to a SaaS solution or a hybrid cloud solution, does that have a change in behavior, skill, and process for the IT organization? For the CIO? Salesforce learned this, that even for them, they've been a huge success. Andrew and I were in Japan. We go to Japan 2 or 3 times a year. And we met some CIOs there, and they go, man, I love the idea about Salesforce coming in and helping us. I'm the CIO. I'm retiring in 5 years. Come back in year 6 because I don't want any. And they don't go, I do not want to change in skill, behavior, or workflow. But it's, guess what? 2 out of those 3 are basically drivers for you going further left. Not bad. It just says be careful about your forecasts. And so this idea about the chasm crossing and the particulars is there's actually a wall here. And we call this the whole product barrier. And the whole product barrier says, do we have not minimum viable product, but minimum viable whole product, as we just talked about a few minutes ago, specifically aimed at the target customer we're going after here. And as PMs, product managers, as investors, as executives, the problem is all the things you've been doing to configure the success for the left-hand side, Nest has, and this is public information, they have $400 million in revenues every year, and they're still early market. Normal people haven't adopted yet, even though many of you might have, but you're not, you know what I would say, you're not normal. And so the reality is, these adjacencies, and one of the biggest lies in Silicon Valley, by the way, is, oh, those are adjacent markets. We get deeper into this. When I went to Harvard Business School, we spent like 2 months on segmentation. And I thought, we could save you some time. In the book, we've got a page or two that says, hey, adjacencies are only if those customers actually have the same problem, and they actually refer to each other before making buying decisions. You'll see that in the book as well. The book's full of examples, and the one main point is that you can have, we made the mistake years ago with a medical device company that it was serving both cardiologists and anesthesiologists. And the client, and we let them get away, go, well, that's one segment. They both went to med school. They're both ologists. That's good enough. They're on the same floor in the clinic. Turns out, you know what? They don't reference each other. The cardiologist and the anesthesiologist, they both went to med school. They each think they're the smarter group. And they don't have lunch together. And they want a career path. And that's not adjacent. Those are different markets, not adjacent segments. Is that even a risk we might have in the room here for when we think about adjacencies? So, the idea about where we are, and an example of a company that's really driven this idea about bowling alley into tornado is Salesforce. You know, they're a multi-billion dollar today.
Hold on.
Whoops. Something happened. Technical help?
Yeah, they're working on it back here.
Awesome, great, okay, good. Okay, super. Give me a little scary picture right there. Okay. So, let me go back to the original first the slide just before this. The main idea was with Salesforce. Did something click out? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So let me just describe. Today, Salesforce is a major power, as you know, with Sales Cloud, with Marketing Cloud, with Support Cloud coming on. And now they're selling to lots of they didn't start with enterprise. Their beachhead segment was truly focused on key verticals in mid-market, because that's really where the change was happening. And what happens is later you go look at Salesforce, go and look at them, a multi-billion dollar company, and they're selling to enterprise. We're going to start there too. That may not be the level of granularity that we really need. What do you think? You think closer?
Wants
All
the
right.
video feed, and he's now.
Yeah,
There you go. You have more Twitter followers.
4, 3, 2, 1. Yeah,
There
right,
you
great.
go.
Okay. So the idea of a Salesforce example is the idea that they've had the discipline to focus, and they've actually made different offers at different times, and now they're doing enterprise. But the problem is in other markets where they're not yet that far along, they may not even have permission to sell to the Fortune 100. They have to go into other markets first. And so what we're going to see is the where question about where you are and where you're competing. And I will be very careful here, and it's going to be the headache slide for the morning. I get that. It turns out that these cycles, these stages, which sound simple enough, actually can each be broken down into 3 additional. So there's really an early market, a 1A, and you'll see the slides, you'll get those later if you'd like them, but I'll give you a little bit of granularity now on that. It turns out, people say, oh my God, consultants, they make everything so complicated. No, the world and your markets are complicated. And it turns out that those different stages, and I'll give you the quick definitions of those now about where you are today, even early market, we divide that into 3. And Chasm, we have it as 1. And just take 30 seconds to just read that slide through, because it's instructive on where you might be if you truly have a nascent disruptive. I'll be quiet for 30 seconds while you look that through. If you're in the product team or investing in ventures or in a large tech company, the one that might excite you the most is 1C, which is at least one vendor, you or someone else, has what we call an 80% whole product. It's captured the main essence. It might still be too complex, but it's getting closer, and the customer votes and decides on what that is. But these people in the early market, they're not buying based on analytics. They're buying based on, I believe you that you can make my situation here at XYZ company better. And so they're buying despite the lack of references and lack of proven ROI. That's the end of that party. The rest of the world behaves differently. They go, can you show me 5 other companies in the medical device field who have already utilized this? And you go, well, we haven't done so much in medical device, but we've done things in consumer products and in banking. And the true pragmatist goes, no, I'm looking for people in my industry. In the early market, it's different. It's like, cool, nobody's yet done it in medical device, only in banking and consumer. I want to be first. It's you can get a false positive based on that initial 10 or 12%. And so the reality, part of you are going to be presenting to your teams in the coming month, and part of your concerns could be, you know what, and we'll get in a minute to the rest of the life cycle, is it looks like we're in chasm. We're lacking credible pragmatist references. We don't have 100% minimum viable a whole product, etc. So we're in, I don't want to tell my executive that we're in Chasm. That is a complete misunderstanding of the term. What I hope you'll see in the first 65 pages, get further if you can, is Chasm's actually not bad. It's a sign of progress. You know what it means? It means you're done with the early adopters, and now it's time to commercialize with normal customers, normal enterprises, normal mid-market businesses, and more normal consumers. And so Chasm is actually a sign of progress. The reason it's got a bad name and a negative connotation is because Chasm can last anywhere from 9 months to infinity. And if it's on the infinity side, you will deserve a bad name on that. So there's technologies that actually take that long to cross. The second page takes the 3 elements of Bowling Alley, Tornado, Main Street, which we'll not delve into here, but you'll see it as a resource later. And again, we've got some blogs. You can go to my LinkedIn page or however you want to do it. But the idea is both Bowling Alley and Tornado Main Street each have their own 3 sets of where we are today on the adoption curve. This is that Easter egg that we were talking about earlier. Awesome, great, thank you. And it turns out that for each of that one of the instructive ones, and some of you are actually in this right now, is you may be in 3A, which is the first segment of pragmatists is actually adopting, but you can almost not give it away to anybody else. It's a new blockchain solution. And by the way, blockchain, you would have to prove heavily to me that that's actually an early bowling alley. It's probably a lot of talk right now and probably further left, but there may be elements of it that's moving to the right. So I hope what these mapping functions do here is allow you to see that there's a differentiation about where you are. And I'll mention something that's going to annoy a few people in the room, but that's kind of part of my job is to, I guess, do that, is one of the dangers is in large companies, and about 40% of you work in large companies, is that you take your best executives, your best sales teams, who make their numbers over here year to year, and that's at Adobe, at HP, at Intel, et cetera, and you go, we're launching a new product line, and it's disruptive, and we want Bob or Betty or Lucy to be charged with that because, man, have they made money for us in the last 5 years. And now you take that person, and you shift them over to the new chasm crossing effort that they're doing. And there's an 85% likelihood it ain't going to work. It's different KPIs, different behaviors. It's a little bit like with HP. They've sold 400 million printers on Main Street, okay? And now they're going to 3D printing. And it turns out the same people that brought you the 400 here, 400 million, ain't going to be the ones that are going to help you commercialize over here. And you can say, well, a little retraining. It's everything about the model that will not allow you to do that. So I don't want to feel guilty about, hey, maybe that's happening in our company, but there's a small chance that's going to work for you. And so the first one is the mapping function around those constructs on both the idea about early market and bowling alley, tornado, and where you are. That's the first question. The second one, which is the, okay, if we truly are in this commercialization mode of going to market, and we're done with 1A, which market opportunity should we attack first? And the elements of that are so crucial, and I put 7 or 8 examples up here, and let me skip the drama if there is any and just go to the full build, is that every company, those 225 examples that we talk about, every company began with dominating some level of segment before they became a market leader, worldwide leader, all 24 time zones and so forth. It's Apple and Spotify, it's LinkedIn. We talked about Salesforce. Even Uber began in one city with one offer. And by the way, Uber was not an offer for everyday transparency and replacement of taxis. It was actually luxury cars and limos is how they began. They learned a lot from that process. Or think of the classic, like a Facebook, right? Began at Harvard, then later moved to other Ivy League schools, then eventually moved to the Big Ten. It was all about university students. Then later went to Tornado when their parents got on Facebook. At which junction the students got off of Facebook, but still growing, kind of the multi. So these things morph over time. But one of my favorite examples is Amazon. This behemoth of a company, when you think of what Jeff Bezos has done at Amazon, both good and certainly disruptive, 2 things going on. One is for the first 5 years, Amazon had one specific target in mind. They hit one key on the piano, and it was the US market, and what was the category they were selling? Books. It's like, no kidding. Now you got to ask yourself, why? Were they that dull that they couldn't think about selling lawn furniture and diamond rings and shoes? Now they're selling tens of millions of items. Why books? If you ask Jeff Bezos, he said there were 2 reasons. One is we wanted a volume business to build out our e-commerce platform. And 2 is we wanted a product that's a little bit mature and mainstream, like it's been around since Gutenberg, since the 1450s, and that a pragmatist customer who buys it online doesn't have to wonder, am I getting a different book than I would get at Barnes & Noble? And the answer is no, it's the same the Stephen King book or whatever it might be. And so the reality is, if you bought anything else, that's a pretty high insight, isn't it, to say, I'm going to pick a category that has the least amount of disruption in it when it comes to online versus brick and mortar. And then later they moved, of course, into other areas. Now, a couple quick correcting points on misunderstandings. Please never put your company on this tech market model. That's a mistake. Because your company is made up of offers and solutions. So even Amazon, you go, oh, Amazon, that's not that hard. They're in probably 5B in the US and maturing. No, Amazon's e-commerce for X, Y, and Z categories. But why did Amazon buy Whole Foods for $13.5 billion last August? They didn't buy it because fresh foods. How many of you have bought fresh meat, fresh vegetables, and fruits online from Amazon? Yeah, so good. So we know there's a few early adopters in here. Most normal people go, I buy almost everything online, I'm Prime, and all that stuff, but I still go to the store to pick out my beef for the barbecue. And so what you could say is that a fresh food category for Amazon was here, even though the rest of it is the behemoth over here. And so for $13.5 billion, it's the last mile, isn't it? The pickup, the order, the brand around Whole Foods, et cetera, that allowed them, and for $13.5 billion, it's a pretty cheap way to build that last mile compared to the money that goes out. So as we think this through, great companies understand where they are and what the right product and go-to-market strategies have to be based on all of that. And there's one, I won't call it a lie, but a white lie on this page, and that says, focus on one segment to start with. The truth is that have a primary application focus point, application, type of customer, geography, but you can have a second one, but we didn't want to put that in the book. Because you're all very ambitious people, and if we said you can go after 2 in the book, then a lot of you go, well, if 2's good, 4 is a hell of a lot better, and if 4 is good, and then you know what happens? We're back to what we call spray and pray. We spray across the whole market, and now we're no longer disciplined about what we're doing. And so we put 1 in the book, but the truth is that there's 25 examples in there about that. Now, the question about where and how to go forth, I'm going to spare you the details this morning on that in the ensuing last 5 minutes as we wrap this up. But there's basically a set of analytics we've developed that allow you to actually score and rate and rank exactly what segment should we be going after and which one do we hit the pause button on today. And it's about a level of helping us cross out and focus. And again, the book describes some of the methods in there, but what we can say is that there's 9 factors that predict whether or not we've actually got abilities to win in the segment, and both the slide deck that you'll see from me, if you want it, we'll be happy to send it to you. The idea that we have a low scoring sample in there and a high score. By the way, a 71 out of 100 says you're a dead man walking in this category. That a 70 says there's some fundamental flaws with your product, whole product, problem solving, et cetera, around that. If you are at the high 80s or 90s, there's a correlation of 80 to 85% that you're going to dominate or at least actively be one of the top vendors in the category. So that's all detail that you can look at in the slide deck later. The example I wanted to briefly put up, and then we'll kind of close on some key comments around this is, one of the amazing companies, and this is all public information that we'd be talking about here, is Nest with consumer IoT. And the idea is that right now, when you think of how they launched this product and where they've been and what they've been able to accomplish over the last 6 years, unbelievable what they've done. Recognizing that they're not yet in high growth mainstream mode, but they're getting there certainly. And based on public information, certainly not a private one, a couple things. One is there's a myth that if Google buys you, you go into tornado. That ain't true. You can still be in early market even though Google's there and you're part of Alphabet and so forth. And that's an example. Google bought them for $3.2 billion, back a few years ago. But right now, as they're looking at how to go forth, they've got a decision to make. And the decision to make is, which segment do we want to really dominate? Is it the self-learning thermostat, which is what brought them to the party in the first place, and a lot of you are customers? Is it smoke detector and carbon monoxide? Is it security cameras? I don't know if you saw, but this is actually a pretty big business. Ring, one of their competitors, just had basically one product, which was the front doorbell camera and security solution. And they just sold to Amazon last month for $1 billion. Just that. It's a one single pony, and they sold for $1 billion to Amazon. And what's interesting is that if you're an early, and so this idea about how they cross, the idea, if you're an early adopter is, I don't think this is a problem. You do all three, bundle them together, go to market, and you got the thermostat, the CO alarm, and the camera, and what's wrong with that is the picture. And the reality is you're going to be moving further left in the adoption curve, not further right with that. Got to pick one. And so they're in process, and there's been some Wall Street Journal articles about actually, looking at that. Same thing is true with Alexa and with Amazon, with Google Home, and where those are on the adoption curve as well. The last part that we want to drill down on, and again, more reading or more discussion or go to our LinkedIn page, whatever, is how do we move forward? And of these 9 areas, if we get the first 3 wrong, then the other 6 don't matter. Who are we targeting? What's that compelling reason to actually switch from the mainstream solution? And then what's our whole product have to be? And it turns out that each one of those, that if you can't, as a result of that list, create, and I'm going to throw a funny number at you here, okay? If you can't create an 11-slide market strategy, 11, really? If you can't do this, then you have a vision, you have a hope, you have a dream, but you don't got a strategy for going to market. And those 9 areas, and what are the 11? The first one is, for your executive team, show them the front page, that's this, and then you would double-click on that and show the details of how you're going to go, who you're aiming at, and so forth. And then perhaps 1 page on the objective, and then another 1 slide for each of the 9 areas. Now, it turns out, have you been in meetings where somebody comes out with a 300-slide deck discussion about how we're going to surrender now? Now, you can have 11 slides and have 289 in the appendices, but don't make anybody read those 289 to understand your strategy. And so, as we think this through, it turns out, and here's a quick example, kind of a snippet of how that would look. We've anonymized this from a real client. But as this level of density says, can you as a product director or VP or investor look at this and say, I want to know more detail, but I don't disagree with what we're doing here. This is the specifics around the high-level review. And of those 9 areas, it turns out that this is not product marketing's job or even product management's job. Although somebody has to own it, it may be one of those, probably the PM, the product manager. But it turns out that you need to have cross-functional buy-in that allows you to do the following, which is to say, you know what? We've got our key executives, and we've got our product team all aligned around who we're going to market with, like Uber has, or like Airbnb has, or like Spotify has. And the danger is, it includes engineering, it includes executives, it includes product management, it includes the whole, including sales. And why you include key sales players in this is, the danger is, if you build this strategy, and you have the executive team buy-in and others, but sales is not included in that discussion, here's the danger. You bring your strategy to the sales team after you've vetted it with everybody else, and the sales team looks at it, and the VP says, huh. And in California, we say, thanks for sharing. In Germany or someplace else, it might be a little more abrupt. But we say, thanks for, and then when the people leave the room, the sales exec goes, I don't know whose plan that is, but I got a different 9-point plan, not that one. And that's a danger, is we need alignment across both the go-to-market side and the product side and the executive side. And that seems obvious, but man, we see what, Andrew, in probably 70% of cases, it's not full buy-in across the full range. And so the danger, and the book will help you a bit thinking that through, and we do workshops and so forth too, is that fundamentally, you got to think of this as a project and a process over 30 days, 45 days to really nail it, and at the end of the day, allow yourself to be successful with what you're doing. And so in summary, a couple kind of key reminders. One is, if we don't answer those 3 questions, then we're kind of working in the room with the lights dimmed down too late, too low, not enough clarity in what we're doing. And as you think this through, whether it's the workshops we do, but even more importantly, just read those 65 pages. That allows you to get some nice levels of granularity around what you do. So let me, at this point, turn it back over to Brandon. And thank you for your attention. If you want to be LinkedIn, of course, do that. And,